All right, let's talk about Crimea and Russia and what Russia is doing currently in Crimea and the straits that go through Crimea that separates that cuts off access to Ukraine. All right, first we have to go back to some context here. First, the NATO and the Western Europeans and the U.S. have been expanding into areas which was promised, and not only that, but there was an agreement made between Russia and the West that beyond Germany's eastern border, there would be no expansion of NATO. But that has not been the case because NATO has expanded literally to the western borders of Russia. Now you add to that the pivot to Asia done by the United States, as well as having I believe something like 60 to 70% of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific Rim. And basically, the U.S. Navy basically running roughshod all over through the international water, the quote unquote international waters. Except that's a European and a U.S. thing where they say, "Oh, we're just freedom of navigation." This is when in fact, that's not really the case, because when you have military equipment, machines of war, basically trampling all over and within immediate striking range into your countries like China faces, and what Russia faces, because that's what's taking place now. The Chinese built all those islands. Well, there's a lot of bullshit, but the strategic reasons for China doing what it did was simple. One was to put up a bulwark, a defensive bulwark, and choke points to keep U.S. military, naval military, from having basically carte blanche to go in and basically do attack without having resistance. So that's what the U.S. is pissed off about, because they can no longer simply send the navy in close enough to set off to fly their planes and whatnot, and shoot off their missiles and into China if the U.S. decides they want to do it. Now, when I say the U.S., I'm talking about the criminals that are in positions of political power, and those of the from the business sector, the quote unquote business sector, the legitimate business sector, being able to make money off of that. And Russia's taken over Crimea and control of the straits into the waters, which literally is on Russia's western doorstep. That was also a strategic move by the Russians, and what they're doing is asserting control over that with the capture and what Western media likes to call aggression. But it's the U.S. has been doing this sort of crap, and the Europeans have been doing this sort of crap, but you just won't you don't hear about it, except for for an extremely small minority of independent journalists who are basically telling point blank, blunt truths. But that's not a narrative that's appreciated. So on a strictly strategic level, now remember, place yourself into the shoes of Russia or China, and you have a you have the West constantly vilifying you, constantly trying to make it look like you're being the aggressor, and so on and so forth. Except uh, to the complete contrary, you got all. You're the one building up the military. You're the one using excuses of such like freedom of navigation, all this other bullshit, and you're the one with all the military over there in their region, in their region, and so between all of that, so what got the media and the politicians constantly harping about, and then you actually have the physical military presence within your region of influence, within your region of living and existence. You're going to take action to mitigate when a hot war, if a hot war starts. You're gonna want to put up bulwarks and defensive so that you won't get a surprise attack, so that you can have abilities to maneuver your armed forces to protect your interests, and that is what it is. China and Russia are protecting their interests. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't like Putin and his government because they're as corrupt, they're as corrupt and criminal as the U.S. And the European political. They're all criminals in my book. But taking aside all that, I also view them to be utterly insane, and they all should be in straitjackets and put into rubber rooms, or they should be arrested and locked away for life. If not, in cases of several of the political figures, I think they should also face death. But that's not going to happen. Not until there's a consensus among the majority, and they understand the dangers that these insane criminals are putting us. And so until there's a consensus by the vast majority, and there's a will behind it to do actually something concrete about it, these criminals will to continue to send us peons to war and die for them. They'll continue to rob us of the ability to get our basic needs, and they'll continue to rob us of the ability to aspire to do anything, follow our dreams. So that's I'm digressing here, but it simply comes down to is strategically, it makes sound sense because you want to plug up when you're trying to defend, and you want to have a chance to stop the enemy from storming into your territory. These are the moves you have to make, and you can't honestly say that there's no chance. So yes, if I'm sounding like I'm not I'm anti-Western criminal politicians, yes, I definitely am. Not to say that, but the Russians should be dealing with their own criminals with the titles of politicians. China, China is the same thing. They have that, but the Chinese should be handling that on the domestic front, which is why I speak about the U.S. and their criminal activities and their criminal push to get to go kill others and have U.S. citizens go kill uh, so that a few criminals can engorge themselves and be rich. Because I'm telling you, throughout history, no criminal who hold economic, monetary, and land and other resources who are up there have ever fought. None. So they're more than willing to send you and me to go die so that they can reap the rewards, but they're not willing to do that, and they're willing to do propaganda. They're willing to do everything and anything to keep themselves wealthy. And I think a lot of people are starting to come to understand this. But the whole point is that strategically, China and Russia are doing what they need to protect their own interests. And I'm not. That's not to say they're protecting the interests of their people altogether, but they are protecting their interests. So, who's to blame? Simply put, it's Europe and the United States and all Westerners who are connected. So that includes Australia. You know, so understand this is a sound move to give advance warning and also the ability to counterattack, and more importantly give time for both Russia and China and everybody else who's on the blacklist of European and U.S. aggression to fortify themselves and get their military ready to defend. That's what it boils down to. I was just watching a thing on TYT talking about this same thing with the Crimea issue, and the thing and the Ukraine Crimea issue. And the thing is I know for a fact that they've touched upon exactly what I've just touched upon. But they're talking about how Russia is bad and how Putin is so bad, and they neglect to point out the very same things that I'm pointing out in this video when they're talking about it. It's not like they don't know about it, because they've talked about it several times. They've mentioned this sort of crap several times. The reasons why, the legitimate reasons why, China and Russia, and I watch TYT. I watch Democracy Now. But the only one that really seems to not be so flip floppy and so and not well thought out it seems to be the Real News Network. You know, they have a consistency that I would say probably reaches 90%. I can't say the same thing with TYT. I mean, on certain domestic issues and other stuff, they are pretty damn consistent in the high percentile. But when it comes to these more serious issues, uh, they get tribal, and whether they're being willfully ignorant or simply just speaking for just to speak. I think that's it's a horrible, because they really shouldn't be doing that. They should be expect. They're always talking about context. They're always talking about impartiality. But you can't be impartial, and you can't be talking about context when you leave out the context and you're leaving out the impartiality. And so, um, you know, I, and the reason why I bitch about why TYT doing this crap is because I know them to be capable. I know them to be objective. I know they can be impartial, and this is what they always talk about. This is all, Jen Yuger always says we're impartial, we're contextual, we're objective. But you got to be objective and impartial about it all. You can't just do it. You can't just do it for one report, one story. You got to be like that about everything, and and that's a disgrace. That's a black mark on TYT, because TYT does a great job on a great many things, but they're pulling, they sound exactly like the established media that they so harp on when they do the exact same thing. And that's probably because TYT is doing commercials, and advertisements and advocacy for. But what can I say? So don't understand what the context is. Understand the reasons, because there's always a real reason why something happens, and there is always a bad guy. But in the Western media, the bad guy is usually not us. It's usually everybody else but us. But if one thing the United States and your Western Europeans have in spades in common, is that they've always been the bad guy. They've always been the aggressors. I mean, just think about colonialism, which didn't end just in the Americas and the founding of the United States. I mean, you had India. The British took over India. The French took over all these. I mean, you look at you talk about the French Guiana. You talk about the U.S. Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands. You the French still have territories. Germans have territories. It's like, let's get away from this nationalization that that we can't do any wrong, because we clearly do wrong, and it's not an indictment or indicative of the vast majority of people living in Europe and in the United States to want to be the aggressors, to want to be the bad guy. The ones who are the bad guys, the ones who are starting all this aggression, who keep perpetrating all these aggressions, are the criminals in the political field who are being paid and bought by the wealthy, by the extremely wealthy and influential in the countries, in the respective countries. I'll give you a prime example. A lot of people don't know how much about Hawaii. Well, guess what? It was either Dole or one of the other companies that that does has fruit and other. They're the ones. Dole company and the people that owned it wanted the coconuts and other bananas and all that other stuff that Hawaii grew. They wanted it, and they wanted control, and the at the time the Hawaii had a monarchy, and the Hawaiian monarchy didn't didn't want to give up their natural resources. They didn't want to be made into nothing more than serfs, and they were offended greatly and honestly offended by these white criminals being paid. So basically, the people that the original people that Dole sent over, they were nothing more than pirates, funded by the quote unquote legitimate company and a legitimate rich person. But and then when Dole was having problems using their mercenary pirates, they talked to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government said okay, and they sent over the U.S. military, and that is how Hawaii became part of the United States. So, who is the actual enemy? Who's the one gobbling up all of the economic value? While the ones who paid for that economic value were the soldiers, otherwise, i.e., known as Americans, were sent over to kill and be killed so that some criminal asshole could, some small number of criminal assholes could reap the benefits. And that is a common thing. Same thing with Vietnam. Same thing with the Korean War. Same thing, with everything that's happened in South and Central America. It's the same thing that happened to the indigenous of all of South, Central, and North America. Same thing that's happening, that happened in Africa. Same thing that continues to happen in Africa. The same thing that's happening in the Middle East or Central Asia, which is what the Middle East is. So you got a bunch of small number of criminals, and many of them are now generational wealthy, who have passed on their wealth and their influence, so that they can send us peons to go out and get and do the shooting, the killing, and the atrocities, and also have us be shot and murdered, so that they can make out on it. While we do the dying and we do the killing, fucking ourselves up mentally and emotionally, and turning us into sociopaths and psychopaths, they're sitting pretty, sipping their artificial, the high priced wines and burgundies and whiskeys and whatnot, and their champagnes. So, if you think about it in this context, and you also think about it in the context that this is what media and the media news and even the law states is what organized criminals do. I don't see where I don't see where this should be any hang up. If you're able to reason, you're able to ration, and you're rational and you're able to reason, it makes complete and logical sense. Well, who the hell wants to die for some other asshole to make out huge sums of to reap huge benefits? There's always a solution. And one of the common solutions to many of the problems we all face, such as, if the price on something that a good that you want to buy is getting too high, and the person and the asshole that's running, which has often been, basically stolen, like, basically somebody had the Hawaii, somebody had money to start up this company, which brought in us peons to work so that they can make more money and gather more resources and influence. And they could dictate what the price is, and they hid it behind, the theories of economics and capitalism and trade, and they give you all this bullshit so that they can, the work, except they've never actually lost any real influence or monetary or resources. They're still living in their gigantic homes. They're still driving. So understand this. You have the power. We all have the power. In your community, you take your villages, your towns, your whatnot. You have the power. Stop paying these criminals. Stop working and paying for these criminals. You want to start growing this. Start growing the stuff yourself. Stop making the bread yourself. Start creating the oils. Creating oils. Animal fat can be turned into oils. So when you're cooking, you can use those oils for lighting. All right, you can make candles. But more importantly, you can grow your food. You can use the natural resource to make clay and glass and whatnot, and those people that know the sort of craft teach it to everybody else. Work together in the community. Don't pay these assholes and give them the power. Another thing that they use is intellectual property, and also the patent and all that. That's all crap. That's all crap. That's how they keep control. Because you allow it, you buy into it. Because you think you're going to be able to get somewhere with it also. So that you can screw over everybody else and become the criminal. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. It's never worked that way. In order for you to start being new money, you need to have connections. Which means you have to, metaphorically give blowjobs. In some cases, not so metaphorical. Women have had to sell themselves in order to be able to reach those goals. And that's just evil criminal compromises. When in fact, we could have a workable society that doesn't depend on some criminal asshole who's trying to take advantage of you and me and everybody else, who doesn't really give a rat's ass, who are now demonstratively demonstrating that they're basically moving to take control in the current political system, and I use political system in a very snaring way. There are many things we could do. We want to have renewable energy. Well, in your towns and villages, gather the people, get people together, or bring people in that have specific knowledge that will be valuable, and start creating electricity in your homes, in your residences, in your mom and pop businesses. Create it, create it by converting the methane when we pass gas, when we go to the bathroom, our solid waste goes into. Stop stop throwing your leftover food into your sink or in your garbage. Have it sent so that it goes into a simple septic enclosed septic system, pressured septic system that you can use a simple hand crank with a condenser pipe, which is basically a pipe that gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so that it pressures the methane so that it can be usable in a liquid or semi-liquid form. You can use that to create electricity. You can use that to do cooking. There's a whole shit ton of stuff you could do with it, including power your vehicles. And you add in stuff like solar panels. You add in wind. You don't need those big, gigantic monstrosities. You can use sailcloth. Hell, you can use whatever. You know those kids' toys where it looks like a flower and it's on a little thing, and you blow on it and it turns it. Well, that's a form of wind power, and it doesn't have to be these gigantic things. Now there's this brilliant thing where you can take electronics and hook it up to plants, and you can feed the bioenergy that's in there and convert that into use for electricity. There's a whole shit ton of stuff we could do. And we don't need GM. We don't need ExxonMobil. We don't need the nuclear power plants, which only create more poisons and hazards. We don't need metal pipes. We could create. We could do the work ourselves and get rid of the lead pipes. We could recycle water at our home, in each and everybody, and put in other infrastructure that will take the excess and hold it and divert it to where it's needed. And you do that both for the methane, which will help create electricity and give us fuel and so on and so forth. And as I said, you add in all the other things to create, so that you don't use up all the methane, so that you can use some of that methane for other purposes. This is a sort of thinking that you do. Go back to learning about older craft. Glass making, ceramics, clay, bricks. You can do all this. And it doesn't take money. What it takes is knowledge. We could all do this. And you take your town, and you get the town next door, and the town next door, and the village next door, and whatever, and you have them. You start demonstrating, and you convince them to join in. You can do all this. This is why Walmart. This is why Kmart. This is why Target and Giant and Acme and all. This is why they can do what they do. The criminal actions that they do. Because you're placing the importance on these criminals when we could be covering everything, and then we could still use money. We can still have taxes. We can still pay taxes that help to do a nationwide stuff for like the interstates and our local roads. We could do. We could still do that, but we could have big time manufacturing, but it doesn't have to belong to one particular small family or group. This this whole thing is basically the whole system that we currently live in is to feed a few criminals. Everybody talks about jobs. Everybody talking about economic equality. Everybody talks about, but we keep playing by the rules of criminals, of con artists. If you keep playing by their rules, when are you going to decide to stop making your own rules and decide that rule should have common consensus? That the rules should be basically that's it. Those are the rules. This is the and you and the thing is doing by what I just talked about builds common consensus, objective consensus. Otherwise, it's all subjective, and it's because of the subjective sort of consensus that we have the system we have today. Anyways, I'm getting angry and frustrated, and because I see it, I see this clearly, and we wouldn't have all the stress and all the fighting and and it all comes down to is like if we don't have the stress and if we actually work as a community, we wouldn't larger portion of the racism of economic inequality, the lack of basic resources, all those sort of things would go by the wayside, and we'd be moving towards more of a utopian society. Anyways, if you got anything from this, good for you, and I'm hoping more people will wake up to this.